I was standing in heels that pinched, smiling through pictures I didn't want to be in. The air smelled sweet, and everyone around me looked so happy, like I was the only one holding something in. Then I felt her tug my hand, gentle but firm. I looked down and she whispered, "Mom, we need to go now." I leaned down thinking she was tired, maybe hungry, but she handed me her phone and her eyes said more than her words ever could. I pressed play. I watched. And in that one quiet second, everything I believed about my family shattered. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just knew we couldn't stay. Before I tell you what I saw in that video, I want to thank you for being here. I don't know how you found this story or what led you here today, but I'm glad you came. Maybe you've been through something too, something quiet, something that made you question everything you gave your heart to. Maybe you trusted the wrong ones, like I did. I used to believe that family meant safety, that blood was a promise you didn't have to second guess. But sometimes the ones sitting closest to you are the very ones who sharpen the knife when your back is turned. I learned that truth not in some loud explosion, not in a dramatic fight, but in a single silent moment. One phone screen, one look in my daughter's eyes, one step away from a room full of people who thought I didn't see them. So tell me, if you're listening, where are you watching from? And more than that, who do you trust with your silence? Who do you believe would never cross a line? Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the ones who clap the loudest often clap to cover the sound of what they've already stolen. My name is Grace. I'm 7'3", a mother, and for most of my life, I believed family came before pride, before rest, before self, before anything. I was only 17 when our mother passed, and my little brother was still just a boy, too young to understand what loss meant, but old enough to feel it in the silence that followed. While other girls my age were picking dresses for prom, I was learning how to stretch rice and frozen vegetables into meals that could last 3 nights. I didn't get to walk across a stage in a cap and gown. I was too busy filling out his school forms, sewing buttons onto his shirts, and keeping our electricity on with part-time cleaning jobs. He was smart, and I was proud of him. I used to stay up late tutoring him in algebra, even when I had to be at work by 6. When he struggled to tie his tie for junior high graduation, it was my hands that fixed it, steady and practiced. He looked up at me like I could do anything, and maybe back then, I could. Years passed, and he grew tall, strong, and quiet. I stayed where I was, working, raising, giving. So when the wedding invitation came in the mail, printed on fine paper with gold trim and a name that barely looked like mine anymore, I paused. He invited me, yes, but he didn't expect me to come. I could feel it in the way it was worded. Polite, formal, almost like sending it was just a formality. I guess he forgot who held his hand when he cried for our mother. I guess he forgot who ironed his shirts and walked him to the bus stop when the world was still too big for him. I guess he forgot who taught him how to tie that first tie. When we arrived at the venue, the sun was warm on our backs and everything looked picture perfect, like something out of a magazine. Soft flowers draped over white chairs, music playing gentle in the distance, glasses clinking in celebration. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that this was a good thing, that I was here for him, for his happiness, for the little boy I raised into a man. We stepped up to the welcome table where a young woman handed me a name card with a practiced smile. I looked down and I saw it. My name, misspelled. Not just a small error, but a name that didn't even feel like mine. I held it in my fingers for a second too long, like I needed to convince myself I still belonged here. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to cause a scene. I just smiled and nodded and followed the directions to table 11. All the way in the back near the server's exit, with a view of the parking lot. I looked up toward the head table, where the rest of the family was already gathered, laughing, raising glasses, taking pictures. They didn't wave. They didn't even glance in my direction. I walked slowly, letting my daughter lead the way, and I sat down without fuss, smoothing my dress over my knees. From where I sat, I could hear faint whispers and catch flashes of side glances, but I couldn't tell who they were about, and part of me didn't want to know. The woman at the next table over kept turning her face away when I looked up. The man across from me made a point not to meet my eyes. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was overthinking it. But deep down I knew what it was. That quiet kind of exclusion that doesn't come with words, just silence and posture. I smiled through it. Because I've had years of practice surviving moments just like that. I've learned how to be invisible without making anyone uncomfortable. But my daughter, she sees everything. She didn't touch her juice. She didn't reach for the bread. She just sat there, watching the room, her small fingers curled tight around the edge of her chair. She didn't say anything, not yet. But her silence held more weight than any toast being raised at the front of that room. She sat there so still, and I didn't notice at first. I was too busy pretending to sip from a glass that had long gone warm, smiling when someone nearby laughed, nodding politely when the music shifted. But my daughter, she hadn't moved in several minutes. Then, without a word, she reached up and tugged my hand under the table. I looked down, and she wasn't scared. She wasn't panicked. She just had that quiet, serious look she gets when something's wrong. And she knows it. I leaned down slowly, trying to hear her, thinking she was going to ask to go home because she was tired or uncomfortable. Instead, she looked right at me and said, "Mom, we need to leave now." It wasn't loud. It wasn't desperate. But something in the way she said it pulled the air from my lungs. I asked her why, still leaning low, and she didn't answer with words. She simply reached into her small bag and handed me her phone. I took it, confused, still half smiling out of habit, and tapped the screen where the video was already queued up. I thought maybe it was a recording of someone being rude or laughing at us from across the room. But what I saw, it wasn't a joke. It was a private room, dimly lit, with voices I recognized too well. My brother, his new wife, and a man I'd never seen before, all standing close, laughing under their breath, like they were sharing a dirty little secret. The audio was clear. Too clear. I heard my brother's voice first. He said, "She's always been a little unstable. I mean, everyone knows that." His wife laughed, low and careful, and added, "If we push it legally, we could argue she's no longer fit to manage the property. I mean, it's not like she has anyone else." The man, the lawyer I'm guessing, said something about paperwork and strategy, about signatures and timing. I kept watching. My fingers went numb, my breath shallow, and still I said nothing. I just sat there, frozen, watching people I had once considered my family talk about me, like I was a burden to be cleared, like I was an obstacle to be handled quietly. They were planning to take my house, the home I built with scraped-together money and sleepless nights, the one I held on to through 3 recessions and a broken marriage, the one I walked through after long shifts cleaning floors in places where no one bothered to learn my name. That house was mine. Every brick, every room, every nail in every wall. That house held my sweat, my tears, and my survival. And here they were, whispering about how to strip it away from me, like I was some old painting that didn't match the new decor. My knees didn't give out, not fully, but I did feel the weight press down, like the room had tilted sideways and everything I thought was true slid straight off the table. I looked at my daughter, who hadn't stopped watching me. Her little hand rested on my arm like an anchor, steady, waiting. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just nodded once, turned the phone over in my hand, and said the only thing I could manage. "Okay." Then I stood up, took her hand in mine, and we walked toward the exit like we weren't leaving a wedding, but escaping something far colder. She looked up at me, like she expected something more to happen. Maybe for me to cry, maybe for me to say no, maybe for me to turn around and pretend it didn't matter. But I didn't do any of that. I just held her hand a little tighter, steadied myself, and whispered, "Thank you for showing me." My voice didn't shake. My feet didn't stumble. I didn't need to make a scene or raise my voice. Some things are louder in silence. We moved through the back of the room, through those perfect white chairs and petals sprinkled like it was some fairy tale. We passed the buffet table, with the fancy gold plates and the tiered cake stacked like it had something to prove. I didn't stop to look at anyone. I didn't try to explain myself. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I just walked. My heels clicked against the stone path, and every step felt heavier than the last. But I didn't pause. The laughter behind us kept going. Like nothing had changed. Like they hadn't just erased me from their plans with one whispered scheme. I felt the wind move through my hair as we passed the garden, those roses blooming like they had no idea what cruelty looked like. And maybe that was the part that stung. How pretty everything looked from the outside. How carefully it was all arranged to hide the rot underneath. We reached the edge of the parking lot, and I unlocked the car with hands that stayed steady because the shaking had already happened, just not where anyone could see it. She climbed into the seat beside me, fastened her belt, and waited. No questions. No tears. Just the kind of calm that comes from knowing you did the right thing, even if it hurt. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, breathing in slow, trying to find something inside me that didn't feel cracked. And then I drove. I didn't look back. Not once. Because when someone shows you who they really are, when they open the door on the part of themselves they've tried to keep hidden, you don't close your eyes and pretend it didn't happen. You walk away. You take the truth with you. And you don't turn around. She was 12 when I changed her diapers because no one else would. He was 8 when I sat down at the kitchen table and helped him fill out his school forms, pretending like I knew what I was doing even though I was barely an adult myself. No one asked me to raise them. There were no court papers, no family meetings, no thank yous. It just happened. One day they were crying and hungry, and I was the only one left standing. So I did what I knew how to do. I showed up. I wiped noses, packed lunches, and made sure they never felt how close we came to falling apart. I missed college because he needed school shoes. I sold the only bracelet my mother left me so we could afford new textbooks for her. I skipped birthdays, holidays, and entire years of my own life just to make sure they didn't feel the absence I lived with every single day. I watched them grow tall while I stayed tired. I clapped when he graduated, louder than anyone else, even though my name wasn't in the program. I helped her plan her baby shower, paid for decorations, stood in the back when she introduced me to her friends, as just someone who helped out. I stayed quiet when they forgot to call on my birthday, told myself they were busy. I smiled through Christmas dinners where my chair was the only one not at the table. I made excuses for their distance, softened the sharp edges of their forgetfulness, until it felt like maybe I imagined the pain. I didn't ask for anything back. Not a check, not a title, not a thank you card. All I wanted was a little space in their lives, a little warmth in return for all the cold I carried on their behalf. And this is how they thanked me. With paperwork and poison. Not even the courage to face me directly. Just a plan whispered in a back room, sealed with a smirk and a lawyer's nod, to declare me unfit and take the only thing I had left that still felt like mine. They didn't just try to take my house. They tried to rewrite my life without me in it. Like I was a name on a document they could erase and replace with their own. I raised a brother, but he turned into a stranger. I protected a sister, and she learned how to lie with a smile. I gave them everything I had, and they decided it still wasn't enough. The drive home was long, not in distance, but in the kind of silence that fills every corner of your chest and presses against your ribs. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't speak. The only sound was the hum of the tires against the road and the soft rattle of the air conditioning. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, something had shifted. I glanced once at the seat beside me. She was still holding my arm, not tightly, just enough to let me know she was there. Her presence was quiet, but grounding, like an anchor keeping me from floating too far into my thoughts. I didn't need her to say anything. I knew she understood more than anyone else ever had. The road stretched ahead in that way night roads do. Empty, endless, honest. And all I could think was how easily they smiled to my face while carving me out of my own life behind closed doors. When we got home, I unlocked the front door slowly, not because I was tired, but because everything about the house suddenly felt different. It wasn't just wood and paint and memories anymore. It was proof. Proof of what I built. Proof of what they tried to steal. I walked through the hallway, past the photos on the walls, and I didn't stop to look at any of them. I went straight to my room, to the old wooden safe tucked behind my dresser. The one that held more than money. It held the life I fought to protect. I turned the key, opened it, and sat on the floor as if I'd done it 1,000 times before, though I hadn't touched it in months. I took out everything. The deed to the house, the bank account forms, insurance papers, birth certificates, passwords written on slips of paper folded 3 times, letters I'd written but never sent, even one from my mother that still smelled faintly like the drawer she kept her sweaters in. I spread them out in front of me like a map of the life they tried to reroute. I started making calls that night. Quietly. Precisely. I called a lawyer I'd once helped through a divorce by watching her daughter every other Saturday. I told her I needed to update a few things. I didn't explain why. She didn't ask. I removed names. I rewrote documents. I adjusted who had access to what. I didn't leave anything undone. I went through every account and made sure no one but me had the keys to anything I had built. Every form they were hoping to manipulate, I rewrote. Every signature they thought they'd pressure out of me one day, I took off the table for good. I didn't do it with rage. There was no storm in my voice, no shaking hands. I wasn't angry. I was awake. And that kind of clarity doesn't come with shouting. It comes with stillness. With a knowing that sits so deep inside you it can't be moved. That night, I sat on the floor of my bedroom with every piece of paper that told my story spread around me, and I made the quiet decision to take my life back, word by word, line by line, page by page. They thought they could erase me while I was still breathing. They forgot I wrote the first chapter. The first call came at dawn, just as the sky was shifting from dark blue to that pale, quiet gray. I was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee I hadn't taken a sip from. I hadn't slept, not because I was restless, but because my mind was wide open, clear in a way it hadn't been in years. When the phone lit up, I didn't need to check the name. I already knew. I let it ring twice before answering, not because I was hesitant, but because I wanted him to feel the weight of waiting. His voice came through the speaker too light, too cheerful, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't handed my name over to a lawyer like a piece of property up for dispute. He said, "Hey, I didn't see you after the toast. Everything okay?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to hear where he'd take it. He paused, then said, "You kinda disappeared. Everyone was asking about you." I stayed quiet. He filled the silence the way guilty people always do. "Look, I just don't understand why you'd leave like that. It was our big day. It was supposed to be happy." His voice softened, like he was reaching for the tone that used to get him out of trouble when we were younger. "You made a bit of a scene, to be honest. People noticed." I breathed in slowly and replied, "I didn't make a scene. I left one." He chuckled nervously like he wasn't sure if I was joking. Then he said it, the sentence they always use when the lie starts slipping through their fingers. "You misunderstood something. I think someone showed you something out of context. It wasn't what it looked like." That's when I spoke. Not loud, not harsh, just calm, steady, and final. I didn't misunderstand anything. I just finally saw everything. He didn't respond right away. I could hear the shift in his breath, like air catching in his throat. He tried to recover, muttering something about how everyone had been drinking, how it was just talk, how people say things they don't mean when they're stressed. But I wasn't listening anymore, because the moment someone tries to convince you that the knife in your back was just a pat, you stop giving them chances. He kept talking, trying to find an angle that would pull me back into the role I used to play, the one who forgave, who explained things away, who covered for everyone else's mess. But that version of me stayed in the garden of that wedding. She sat down when I stood up. She didn't come home. I told him, "This house, it's mine. This life, mine too. And I've already changed the locks on both." He got quiet then. The kind of quiet that tells you someone finally realizes they've lost access to something they thought they owned. I ended the call without waiting for him to find more words. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't block his number. I just placed the phone face down on the table and sat with the silence he left behind. For the first time in a long time, it felt like peace, because when someone spends years pretending to love you while planning your undoing, the only answer worth giving them is your absence. 2 days passed without a word from anyone else. No apology, no explanation, just that one call from my brother, and then the kind of silence that feels rehearsed, like everyone agreed to pretend nothing had happened. I spent those 2 days in a quiet rhythm. Cooking simple meals, organizing drawers that hadn't been touched in years, folding laundry with care like I was wrapping up versions of myself I no longer needed. I watered the plants, opened the windows, let the air shift through the rooms. It felt like I was cleaning grief out of the corners. I didn't expect anything more from them. I had already made peace with the fact that their version of family didn't include me unless they needed something. But on the third morning, just after breakfast, I heard the doorbell. Not once, not rushed, just a single chime, steady, too polite to ignore. I didn't look through the window. I already knew. There's a certain kind of knock that carries entitlement with it. When I opened the door halfway, I saw her. His new wife. Her hair perfectly in place, makeup soft and careful, holding a small white gift box wrapped with a ribbon that looked like it had been tied by a professional. She smiled, wide and warm, like nothing had happened, like we hadn't both heard the same video, like she hadn't stood in a room and discussed how to take my home, like it was a prize in a contest I didn't even know I was entered in. She said my name gently, like we were old friends. Said she brought something by, just a little something to clear the air. I didn't ask what was in the box. I didn't move to take it from her hands. I just stood there, one hand on the edge of the door, the other steady at my side, and I looked at her. Not with anger, not with disgust, just with truth, the kind of truth that doesn't need to raise its voice. And then I said it, quiet but firm. This house doesn't belong to you, not even in your dreams. She blinked like she didn't hear me right, like maybe I'd misunderstood her kindness. But I hadn't. I understood exactly what she was doing. The box wasn't a gift, it was a reset button. A way to sweep things under the rug so they could try again, maybe quieter this time, maybe smarter. But I wasn't going to give them that chance. I didn't slam the door, I didn't roll my eyes, I didn't even step back. I just let my words hang in the air between us, and then, without another sound, I closed the door, fully, firmly, and I locked it. From that moment on, the house felt different. Not just because of what I'd said, but because of what I finally stopped allowing. Some people knock on your door not to come in, but to check if they still can. And once you show them they can't, the silence they leave behind becomes the loudest freedom you'll ever hear. That weekend, I didn't cry. I didn't replay the phone call or the visit or the video. I didn't waste one more breath trying to understand how someone I raised could look at me like a stepping stone. Instead, I picked up a paintbrush and a can of soft cream-colored paint I'd been meaning to use for months. I opened the windows wide, let the light pour in, and moved from room to room, freshening the walls like I was giving the house a second breath. With each stroke, it felt like I was wiping away pieces of their plans, scrubbing out the shadows they left behind. I changed the locks next, not because I thought they'd come back, but because I needed to hear the sound of a key turning in a brand new direction. It clicked different this time, sharper, stronger. Like even the house agreed that the old way in was no longer welcome. Then I went out back, where the soil was still warm, and I planted flowers along the walkway. I didn't buy anything expensive, just simple blooms, marigolds, lavender, and some wild daisies. I dug with my bare hands, feeling the earth under my nails, letting the dirt press into my skin like a quiet reminder that life grows when you tend to it, not when you force it. Inside, I cooked meals without looking at the clock. I didn't rush. I didn't measure. I let the scent of garlic and rosemary fill the kitchen, and for the first time in a long time, I danced while the onions sizzled. My daughter joined me, her small feet hopping across the floor, giggling, spinning, tossing flour in the air like she was decorating the world. We sat down together at the table with no phones, no distractions, just the sound of spoons tapping against bowls and our laughter catching between bites. She told me jokes she made up on the spot, and I laughed like each one was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. And maybe they were, because they came from a place of real joy, the kind that isn't wrapped in expectation or performance. The house felt lighter by Sunday, not because anything outside had changed, but because I had. The rooms no longer echoed with the weight of betrayal. The air moved through the windows with purpose, like truth was finally allowed to pass through without resistance. There were no voices whispering behind doors, no one knocking to reclaim what was never theirs to begin with. Just us. Just peace. And in that stillness, I found something I didn't know I was missing. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache. The kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from finally being free. They thought I'd collapse, that I'd sit in a corner somewhere, whispering to myself, wondering if I had imagined it all. They thought I'd second-guess my own memory, doubt my decisions, beg to belong to a table that had already been cleared of my place setting. But what they didn't understand is that the kind of strength I carry doesn't scream. It doesn't show up in big declarations or heavy doors slamming shut. It shows up in the stillness after betrayal, in the steady breath of someone who knows they've survived worse and came out wiser. They wanted me broken. Easier to handle. Easier to erase. They wanted me questioning my own mind so they could rewrite the story while I stood there quiet, nodding along. But the truth is, I didn't lose my brother. I lost the girl who believed he'd never hurt me. I lost the version of myself that kept making excuses for his distance, that softened every blow into misunderstanding, that wrapped silence in ribbon and called it grace. I let her go, and in her place came someone else. Someone clearer. Someone quieter, yes, but only because she'd finally learned who deserved her voice. There was a time when I would have sat with that pain longer. Tried to fix it, tried to hold the family together like glue that never got to dry. But not anymore. Not now. Because something happened in the middle of all that mess, something they didn't plan for. While they were plotting behind my back, whispering lies and drafting plans, someone else was watching. Someone small but strong. Someone who didn't need proof to know what love looks like or what betrayal feels like. That little girl, she saved me. Not with grand gestures or big words, but with the truth. With a phone held up in shaking hands. With a whisper in my ear when everyone else was laughing. With the courage to show me what I wasn't ready to see. And because of her, I didn't fall. I didn't crumble. I stood. I made decisions I had avoided for too long. I claimed the peace I kept giving away to people who had no business holding it. She looked at me different after that weekend. Not like I was someone to protect, but someone who had protected her. And I hope one day, when she's older and the world tries to turn her soft heart into silence, she remembers that day. She remembers what it means to see the truth, to trust your gut, to walk away when it's time. Because in the end, what I lost doesn't compare to what I found. I found my strength in the eyes of someone who watched me with love, not judgment. I found my worth in the silence that followed their absence. And I found myself, again, not as who I used to be, but as who I always was, beneath the weight of everyone else's expectations. If someone ever tried to erase you while smiling to your face, if you've ever fed people who later called you unstable, if your silence was mistaken for surrender, then this story was yours too. You're not alone, and you never were. Tell your story if you feel ready. I'll be reading. And just so they never forget, they planned to take everything I built, but they forgot. I laid every brick, and I walked away with the blueprint. Subscribe if you felt this. Stay with us. There's more truth to tell. Thank you for watching.